Thank you for downloading from Digital Mindfulness. This is episode number 45. Hello and welcome to the show. Today my guest is Petter Neby. He's the co-founder of the Swiss technology company Punkt. Punkt creates devices that offer modern-day consumers a simple design alternative to the complicated, multifunctional technology devices which dominate the consumer electronic marketplace today. Neby's vision goes back to the basics of consumer electronics, to pioneering solutions for simpler living. I hope you enjoy this show with Petter Neby. Hello, Petter, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm wondering if we can start just by letting the audience know a little bit more about Punkt, what your inspiration was for it, and what your journey was to starting the company.
Punkt is, let's say, my brainchild, and it comes out from we all do, living in a very rapidly changing environment. And I think one of those most inspiring elements for truly going in and doing something with this is that I also had a young stepdaughter some 10 years ago, living at home and seeing how she got drawn into social media. And then, of course, once the smart telephone came in, it really took over her life, so to say, or our ability to interact with each other. So I would say that was sort of a strong, both visual and emotional memory of where, in a way, it's all started, so to say. Conscious consumer, not buying anything just because I'm told to consume it. So, and since I'm a typical an entrepreneur, I'm not a writer or an artist, and so rather writing a book about it or doing similar, I make products to solve what I think is important to solve, which is for me about rebalancing our relationship with technology.
So that's really, really interesting what you just said, because it sounds like through your daughter you were able to see just how much the world was getting distracted by their use of technology.
Yes. Well, that was sort of the eye-opening element. But I must admit that later I was also starting to look at myself, and I wasn't that much better, was I? I do have some. I did have more consciousness about not bringing it to the table when for dinner or for whatever, etc. But in general, I had an equal issue by even though it wasn't social media, it was about always being available for instance, our let's say very nice modern tool and not so nice modern tool is the email, which can be quite distracting for being alive and existing and being present in the moment. So so that's just developed into a clearer view of my own reality and my own relationship with it. So therefore, I started to build the consumer electronics that I thought, I think of what I build more like tools, like instruments, really. So I don't want them to be so central to our lives, but since we are living in a modern society and there's a lot of beauty in technology, I just think that they currently occupy too much of a central stage in our lives, and therefore when I make these products, I make them to be more like instruments that you go in and use for a certain thing, and then you leave them aside, so to say.
So let's move on now to talking about your devices, because they really are quite unique. How do they help people to overcome digital distraction?
Well, I think the analogy is the fact that the smartphone, which is really the center of distraction, really, and then of course as a device, so to say, and whatever sits inside there, or whatever, then through this ever presence of a device, what services can sort of be rendered to us, so to say. Therefore. That's what is called a smartphone is really a computer that you can also talk from, but it's and this computer is a little bit like the Swiss Army knife. It can do a lot of things, but it has certain, it's like a convenience store rather than a specialized store, or a Swiss knife rather than the bread knife and the fish knife kind of thing. So if we follow that analogy, is to say that yes, we understand that there is certain moment or element of convenience in having everything in one device, but truly there are some aspects of that on one side actually it interferes a lot and really creates a lot of anxiety currently. But on the other side, it's not really good as a telephone, is it? For instance. So there it comes in that, if you really need to be available when you are not in your home or your office, you need a mobile phone, yes, and that's great. But it's really just having that phone already covers the main aspects of a mobile device that, okay, I want to be available for whether it's work or being in an emergency, calling someone, or my family can reach me. And therefore, I think this kind of, let's say, to compartmentalize these instruments into focused usage helps us in controlling our relationship with technology, so that if you have a phone, I mean, our brains work that way. We are so behind the way our mind works. Is so behind the current development of things and we really work very well with one item doing one thing. So if you and therefore these objects can help us or can help anchor that when you are together with this object, it can do that, and your brain will respond to that. That is what that object does, and therefore its emotional interference, is therefore linked to what that object is doing. Yeah.
So, Petter, would you say then that people experiencing digital distraction and an inability to focus now, is that a product of the way that we choose to live our lives, or is it simply a design problem with the technology that we choose to use?
I think it's a combined problem. I think it's because it's a lifestyle, but the lifestyle is so strong by let's say trends and let's say what are others doing. And then the design element is certainly there is a lot of design element in terms of interest. So let's say interest of those that actually supplies these items or these objects. So yeah, I can't I would never distinguish them. It's just the fact that if the Johnsons are doing that, you might want to watch out what that is, and you might want to be better or as equally as good as them. And that's a little bit our nature, isn't it? That we just on one side on that lifestyle element that we it's easier to just to follow or do what everyone else do rather than having a conscious mind about how good it really is. And then on the design element, it's of course of course, to build, especially consumer electronics, which is very different from, let's say, knives and and folks is the fact that there's a lot of investments that needs to be made before it ever can even see the light of day, and therefore investments tend to, of course, call on revenues, and these revenues typically you need to have a lot of costs related to development, but also the operational aspect. And therefore, what happens is that it's this kind of never-ending story about the necessity of always inventing something that not necessarily is so important for the, let's say, the quality of what you're doing, but the necessity of just developing something new just because you need to sell something new. And so that's another aspect of this, let's say, the background of the design question, isn't it? That the system works that way. So therefore, we end up with the push of commercial interest. We end up believing that this is so important, or it's such a it's so important to follow these kind of trends rather than stop and think if they're really important. So and it's for everyone. I mean, whether you live in Africa or Europe or wherever, we have this same kind of element of being seduced by improvement or feeling better or looking better.
It's really interesting, Petter, because one of the reasons why we consume technology so readily is that we feel that we have to get the latest, sleekest version of the technology because it keeps upgrading, keeps getting better. And I think that's something that your devices work against. And I'm really, really interested about your products now in general because I'd really like to know the thinking behind them. Like, how do they help you, and also how do they help your customers to focus more on what it is they're trying to do?
Well, it helps you focus. I mean, it's a little bit going back to the analogy I used before, is that when it's an instrument for a conversation, it's only for that, and it doesn't do much more. Yes, you can receive an SMS, but thankfully, SMSs are taxed by. There's a cost to sending a message, so you don't receive them as you would do through social media notifications or WhatsApp notifications. So anyway, so it helps you focus. It helps to say, okay, this is a phone. If someone calls me, I will be entering into a context of conversation, and that's it, really. There's nothing more. So, and you will be. Therefore, you will have a much greater ability to be and use all of your cognitive senses, really, by being in a conversation. And that's another element of the phone itself. And that's the phone is so, let's say, it's so important because people are not talking any longer. People are messaging. And what happens when we do messaging versus conversation is that we almost, we tame and we put most of our cognitive senses to an idle situation, but only, even though it would always be better to be face to face, to smell each other, to hear each other, to sense each other physically, a conversation is almost equally as good. And in a conversation, we use so much more of our cognitive abilities than we do through messaging. And I think therefore, that product really is a lot about, taking back the conversation, building something that is, I think is very, apart from beauty, but also a product that is well made to do one thing. And that thing is about having a conversation. And that conversation is something that we need to, let's say, propose people to take up again, because people are not talking any longer. So that's, one part of the telephone. To focus is this, of course, relates that. So when you're not wanting to be available or being distracted, you would, even with this simple telephone, you should switch it off and just be present in the moment and focus on whatever you want to or you should be doing. You can possibly even focus even better having that telephone, because there are only so many calls during the day, so the telephone can be on, and you won't have any distraction by notification or the urge to check what the weather will be tomorrow, or the urge to follow the latest news from somewhere which is so distant from you that you should probably not use too much emotional energy onto it, and rather thinking about what is around you. So I think that's what that these instruments do. They do one thing, and since it's just very focused, it won't have a massive disruption of your being. And if you want to, I think the first product I really wanted to do, which is the least, let's say, emotional object, but still is a very important object that which really started me, and I didn't really know how much more I should be doing than just this product, and that was alarm clock. And the alarm clock is in a way the most is the one that to me defines let's say better what rebalancing a relationship with technology is about, and that's because, of course, more and more people do use their smartphones or their telephones as an alarm clock rather than having just an object just doing one single thing, waking you up in the morning. And what happens with having this distraction beside the table, which even the telephone is off, we do know that psychologically it is a very certain distraction for your sleep. So that alarm clock really is the sort of the figurehead of how important it is to if you need to go to sleep, as we all do, go into a place where you can be focusing on sleeping and nothing else, and waking up when you need to.
Yeah, I really want to delve a little bit more into this, into the alarm clock that you developed, because I know that this is a really important part of your suite of distraction-free technologies, and but I also know through the research that we've done here that it's really difficult for people when they do use their smartphones as alarms to not get swept up in using the web or going to work email. And so it is really important actually to have this one function technology to just wake up naturally.
Yeah, and to give you that buffer, because we wake up in the morning, we're still sort of bringing along whatever we were processing of information during our sleep, and we're still in that mood for some time, probably the first half an hour or wake up time. So therefore, it is very important to not go into that artificial information push immediately, because you need that kind of buffer before you are mentally or ready for facing that world, so to say. So yeah, and we do see that from lots of surveys. How many people will check their telephones within 5 minutes, within 10 minutes, within it's quite extraordinary that the first thing they even go before they go to the loo, they actually check their bloody smartphone, and that's quite sick.
So I'm wondering, Petter, do you tend to get this kind of enthusiastic response from people all over the world once they try your products and they actually start to explore using distraction-free technology?
Yes. No. That's, of course, that keeps one going when you have a resonance, and it doesn't need to be that many. It just needs to be enough that gives you the certainty that there are someone like you there, or someone that thinks similar as you do, and it's as you mentioned for your podcast, how these will be traveling the whole world. It's not only, London, New York, San Francisco, but it's all Riyadh or Mexico City. So goes with these products. It's obviously it's something, because we are a Swiss company and you tend to be able better catering to someone nearer to you. But truly, we have sold this alarm clock or the phone practically everywhere in the world. When I first started, I said that the alarm clock was my first product, but it was so difficult to make a simple alarm clock. So we ended up actually launching the fixed line phone first. But already there, I practically received love letters from different places of the world, talking about and understanding why I was doing what I was doing. So that was very encouraging, really.
So I imagine that with the alarm clock in particular, because its only job is to help people to wake up naturally and in a non-stressed way. I imagine that that's received universal praise and goodwill from people.
And it's been until the mobile phone. It's certainly been the best-selling product, and from the Marshall Islands to Kuala Lumpur to probably not Tonga or not North Korea, but still, it's going everywhere. So. And you see that let's say the alarm clock is relatively costly, but it is costly to develop a well-made product. So it's not necessarily, let's say, the very affluent that goes in and buy it, but someone that actually has made that conscious thought that, this is, why not, put money into a alarm clock that should last for ages and sit at and do just that one thing and also look pretty good.
Now, I wonder if we can just talk a little bit about the phone that you've developed, because the phone is really fascinating. I've certainly considered getting what they call a dumb phone, and I know that a lot of people have bought this phone that you're using, and certainly a lot of my colleagues have said to me that the phones that we were using in the late 90s and the early 2000s, those retro phones, if you like, would start to make a comeback as people are looking for devices that just help them to focus on one thing and to do that thing well. In this case, it would be communication. But I'm wondering if the same response that you get from my colleagues that have been completely vindicated now, if this is the same enthusiastic response that you get from your customers.
Oh yes, it's tremendous, and it's any level of society, and it's any geography, and it's any age group, which is really interesting because you see also when I thought of mobile phone when I launched the telephone already, because they were not, obviously, let's say my age, middle-aged man used to have such a Nokia or whatever similar, knew what that kind of product would do or not do, but there were young men asking, why don't you just make a simple mobile phone, similar to your telephone, just that does the calling, and that's it. So that gave me a lot of courage to do this project, which has been very difficult, so to say. And yes, and therefore there's been a lot of resonance, and there's been so much embracement, so to say, of this, and there've been so many nice angles to why they like it so much. And of course, you will always have, let's say, those that would follow design and knowing the designer of the product and say, this is a beautifully designed product. But you have mostly it's about what the product is and how well made it is, and it really sits. It made for holding it in the hand, etc. And just what it does to me. You have feedback like, oh, finally I'm entering the optional connectivity kind of messaging, or finally I got my life back. my wife and I in love again, etc., etc. And it's amazing how much it has been, and continues really. So it's this is. Of course, Punkt is a business, but it's equally as much. It's equally as much a. I'm trying. Standing on the barricades to try to at least do my part in telling us we should be more conscious about how we relate to technology, and that's what uh, encourages one to go on. And the more one see people respond to that, the greater it is really. So it's been very, very rewarding.
So, Petter, is the way that you live your life in tune with the philosophy of your products? Are you able to live consciously with technology yourself?
Well, one has to live as one preaches, no? At least one should try. And since I'm converted, and the converter would be the one who preaches the stronger. I would say in a way, even though it might sound a little bit selfish, but I make these products primarily for myself. Meaning that I only make a product that I think I find meaningful, that will do something for me. Not just making a pretty product. It's not about that. It's just making a product that would help me to help me with controlling my life with digital, the digital environment, so to say. So and I used the Nokia for some time before, let's say, I got the first golden samples of my own phone, and I already sort of experienced it, let's say, the nice element of when you can switch off your computer and your smartphone, and you just be there available for your son who's out late night or just for the weekend. My weekends are practically no digital at all, because I will switch off my smartphone and my computer at 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and I will go back there on Monday morning. Before that, I saw that I would, I would do a call on Saturday, but I also had 3 new emails that, rather than just wait for them for Monday, I couldn't resist being there and showing that I was available, and would comment whatever so-called urgency, which never is as urgent as one sense at that moment. So I'm living as I'm preaching. I'm sometimes better, sometimes worse. But of course, I am a user of my own devices in double meaning. So yes, it helps me, and I think that, let's say, it depends also what your life is. For instance, I travel a lot. I work in distance. Now currently I'm sitting in Florence. My office is in Lugano. I use a lot of computer and email, etc. And I again travel. So at certain time, when I travel, I find mobile computing very very good, because I can be, let's say, efficient in my working hours, so to say. But it's still it still helps me then to have this telephone, to say, even when I'm traveling, that 7 o'clock, office hours over, just having that telephone. So yeah, I absolutely endorse it personally.
Now, Petter, for some of your products, you've actually had a lot of celebrity endorsement of these distraction-free devices. Could you just elaborate a little bit more on that for us?
Well, it just happens in that way that clearly we hit something with the mobile phone. I mean, as I said, okay, the mobile phone is our 5th product. The previous products are more sort of objects that possibly doesn't draw that much emotion. But of course, since we are talking, I mean, we're having this conversation, it is a topic that is quite high up in the high up on priority currently, because it is something that very many feel, many are feel frustrated about, this element of the smartphone taking center stage. And when we launched it in September in London, we had so much reaction about this, and we were nominated for best design by Wallpaper, which is this British-based design and fashion magazine, and it just happened that one of the panelists were Eddie Redmayne, who's a British actor who won the Oscars last year, and he mentioned then, after they sort of made the decision of what is good and not in this award process, and he said that he really started to talk about this mobile phone made by Punkt, and that sort of caught on and sort of spiraled into Eddie Raymond in his dumb phone life, etc., etc. So it just happened because I think it happened because it's in the air. It's nothing that we really, we didn't call up Eddie Redmayne and ask him to talk about it. It's just him being a part of this panel of judges to judge on what is the good product, so to say. And yeah.
So what would you recommend that people can do right now in their lives to live better with technology, to live in a way that doesn't enable them to be distracted or unfocused?
Well, I think I think it is one of those tricks that such an instrument does, is that it helps you to distinguish better between work hours and non-working hours, because currently with this always available, always on, is that we are children in a candy store. We are eating too much candies, digital candy, and we can't have enough of it, but we know it's not good for us. So, but unfortunately, we're still not adult enough, because this, we talk about something that is almost omnipresent, but it just happened, 10 years ago, when really this kind of smartphone trend really took off with the iPhone 3. And so in such, if you think of that as the context of your reality, so to say, that, let's say, all of this development happens ahead of what you're just running behind, try to figure out how to deal with it, so to say. So and I think sort of the best way to, well, for me, how that works best is to help you to distinguish better when you are working and you're not working, and if you then need that social element at a certain point because you have friends and family and blah blah blah, you should also compartmentalize that into a certain time rather than being always into that. Again, there might be some elements of good in social media, but it's not good if it's omnipresent. So it is, again, working hours start, whether it's 9 to 7 or whatever. This is your working time. This is when you should be present. This is when you're expected to be responding to things. But after that, you should switch off. And that switching off, of course, if work is on your computer, it's easier to just, because you're leaving that physically behind and you leave that office. That helps you to sort of say, okay, now I'm out of that always on. Okay, if you have this necessity of social media, maybe you should give yourself an hour in the day, maybe at a certain point of the day, and do that as well. And then you should say, okay, dinner time, that's when everything stops. So it's, which I touched upon earlier, is this kind of how our brains work, and therefore it helps us to define, anchor the day into categories. Sorry, that was my dog. into categories of what that part of the day should be doing, or what you are about in that day. And I think that also is there's something underlying this element of, we are all, suddenly we are all professionals. Even people that have no profession, they are becoming, bloggers and talking about the hero. There's, they're filming themselves sitting in the bed, whatever. So we almost like, we are not being ourselves any longer. We are all this having this looking outward, having people looking at us, and it's a terrible situation, because it's almost like we are all pop stars, and we have to sort of manage how we are perceived from the outside world, and no one can be happy living such a life, and it's not good for anyone. And we're becoming sort of these vanity kind of robots. We're all doing the same things and just sitting there and controlling how we are perceived. And if it's so that you need to do that, just do it a part of your time, not do it the whole day, so to say. So yeah, that's the tip of the day.
Great. Petter, where can people find out more about you, your work, and the products that you're working on?
I think the best would be to go to punkt.ch, which is our website. Then we have the good old Google, where one can certainly, if one Googles Punkt mobile phone, there's different angles to what this phone or the alarm clock is about, which is, I think, is enriching. But yeah, it's our website. I think would be the best destination, so to say.
Great. Well, Petter Neby, thank you so much for spending time with us here on Digital Mindfulness. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Thank you for having me.